What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to revisit this air layer project that I started last May. Last summer I put some wire on the trunks on this to start some air layers, and I want to check in and see whether that wire has girdled the growth on the trees enough so that they will actually begin to issue roots. Now, I'm going to predict that it hasn't actually gotten far enough. I can see one of them because the pot slipped down, but I'm going to go ahead and take all of the pots off, make a gigantic mess, and then reassess everything. If I peel this back a little bit, you can kind of see this one, the wire that I used to girdle it is right here. It's unlikely that there's going to be any roots underneath that, but let's go ahead and check anyway. That one is definitely not doing anything yet. I'm gonna check this one next because I think this might be my best shot at a winner. Either this one or the one that I stacked above it. When the tree's not growing as quickly, it's gonna take a lot longer for these layers to happen because there's not as much swelling at the cambium where it's being girdled. However, in this case, looks like there is a little bit of success going on here. So you can see that most of that just kind of peeled away, but there are a few juniper roots here. If I try to separate this now, it's likely that if I put it out in the sun again after separating it, that it would potentially die. But if I put this in the greenhouse after I separated it, it's got a pretty good chance of living. With that one checked, let's go to the one above it, which has more foliage feeding it. All right, so as you can see, there's a big mass of foliage here, and that, assuming that I got the wire nice and tight inside here, is going to drive this layer being successful more quickly. So let's take a look. There's plenty of roots in here, and so this one has plainly been successful. I don't know. Nice little spider right there. I don't know exactly how successful. I can sort of take apart the sphagnum moss and sort of explore it a little bit more here, but it appears that maybe there's just one side of it that's actually rooted rather than the whole thing. It's also possible that it rooted from one of these smaller branches rather than from the large trunk, which would in essence be a failure because that wouldn't give us the wood that I'm looking for, you know, the shortcut in terms of getting to a larger piece of wood that is relatively short. But I think with this amount of roots on here that I'm probably safe to go ahead and separate it. All right, so right here you can see a root that issued from up on that piece of wood, but there's also some that are issuing right down here from the junction and in between. So I'm gonna go ahead and just saw this off here and plant this as a separate tree. There, I've got it separated. I can rotate it a little bit more easily. There should be plenty of roots here to help the tree sort of establish itself in a container, but I'm going to put it in the greenhouse to ensure that it doesn't get too stressed out. I would also sort of expect, since all the roots are on this side, that any foliage that was being supported over here, in other words, like this part right here, is probably going to die. One of the lower ones here, off on the side, not nearly as big as that one on the top was. Let's take a look. Yeah, no roots on that. As you can see, it just sort of slipped right off, and this being the girdle right here, I would have expected the roots to be coming out somewhere in this section. And I can kind of tell just by wiggling this one that there are no roots coming out. So as you can see, the girdle here is not really doing that much yet. And that's because the foliage over here is, while it's running, it's not really taking off and producing a lot of wood. So I'll need to reattach these if I want to create more air layers from them. I think as an experiment this was interesting, but I don't think that either this one or the one back here that didn't take are interesting enough to try to complete. This one that's up here that is already rooting a little bit, I am going to rewrap, and the other ones, as far as getting them off of this tree, I'm just going to give up on for now. So with this one that I separated, because I think it's more interesting to actually look at it and figure out what's going on than it is important for me to have another juniper, I'm going to dig around in here so that I can actually see some of these roots a little bit better. Most of the rooting is going on right here at the junction of this big piece of wood that was the original air layer and this smaller side branch. It's a common place where junipers have a tendency to send out clusters of buds, making it more likely that it would also root there. So you can kind of see that there is, multiple small roots coming out in this area, as well as little teeny shoots there. So I don't need everything that's here. It would all drive root production, wood production, etc. But I'm just going to cut off a few of these things to kind of clear out and make some space. Now, this kind of material created from an air layer like this is going to automatically give you a very different starting point, obviously, than a large cutting. I'm not going to pigeonhole it into being an informal upright or anything like that quite yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a little bit more of this sphagnum moss and go ahead and plant this. I'm also going to remove the girdle here and then just see what ends up surviving and what ends up dying. Because I think that the best use of this piece of material will ultimately be either a shohin or even smaller composition, I'm going to put it in a pretty small container. All right, well, not a complete success, but not a complete failure. So this is the one that I separated, and like I said, I'm going to put this in the greenhouse, probably under my misters. If you didn't have a greenhouse, I would say just put it in the shade, and it's okay for it to be warm, but just not in a lot of super direct sun for the next few weeks as it transitions from getting some of its resources from the root mass here to getting all of its resources from the root mass that's here and still building up. And I don't anticipate that the majority of what is here is even going to be usable. I'm going to have to regrow this tree from scratch essentially, but what I have here is something that's a lot more interesting as a starting point than just a regular cutting. As for the layers that were not successful yet, I've rewrapped the one that's up here, and I'm going to leave the girdles on these guys. I'm going to put this in the greenhouse, also in the misting system, so that I can keep an eye on the relative color of the foliage and then see what actually happens. I don't think that these will issue roots anytime soon because the foliage on the ends of where I was doing the air layers is not strong enough yet. It's not sending out runners like we see on really strong junipers, and that means that it's not creating a lot of wood. So I'm going to let the tree kind of build up some steam, and as for the one that already has a few roots, I'll just let it continue to grow in that container. That wraps up this video. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.